Hello again all, and welcome back to another video. Now today, after the relative success of my last video that I posted all about how I use the underrated plugin Folder Notes inside my Obsidian system, I got a request to dive a little bit deeper into the Dataview tables that I use inside of these folder notes. So I thought today's video I'd do just that, and also go over a couple of the other very peripheral uses for Dataview that I have in my vault and demonstrate to you those things. Just as a quick recap though, I use the plugin Folder Notes to create indexes of many of the folders in my Obsidian vault, just so that I have a simple point of entry that allows me to see all of the notes within said folder in a specific note in Obsidian, and also as a space that I can write any other short one-liner, two-liner kind of points that excuse me, don't really belong in their own note inside said folder. They just belong as a point that's related to the folder, so I add it simply on the folder note. But now what I'm going to do is take you into my Obsidian vault and show you the command that I use to build these Dataview tables in the folder notes, so I can have these indexes as a very functional part of my personal knowledge management system. So here we are back inside my Obsidian vault. And I thought what I'd do first is actually show you a couple of examples of these folder notes, just so you have a bit of an idea of what they look like and how they function. So we'll use the current projects that I have and that I'm working on as simple examples for this. So if we head into perhaps write a literature review, which is something I've been putting off for a few weeks now at university, we can see that clicking on said folder in the sidebar brings up this folder note in which I have a table that contains links to all of the different notes inside the folder. So if I expanded the folder, you'd be able to see down here all of the different notes that are actually inside of it. But as it stands, we don't actually have to ever do that in the sidebar, because we have this folder note that contains all the data already. So if I headed to basic notes to introduce, then I've gone straight to one of the notes in that folder without actually having to search it or open it up on the sidebar. And underneath this table, which I'm going to show you how to create just in a minute, I'll quickly point out that here are the points of one or two lines that I write related to said project of writing a literature review, but that don't actually deserve their own note. So we'll have a look at a couple of other examples as well. The content note, where I write all of the content that I want to be posting, has a few of these different tables, and this is a slightly modified folder note that I will go over a little later in the video. But you can see here perhaps a more complex note, but still the same essence of laying out all of these different entry points into different notes. And another example of this is the Readwise note, where all of my Readwise highlights get synchronized in. And you can see that, again, it's a little bit more complex. There's a few more notes, but I'll go through these slightly more complex examples a little bit later on in the video. But first of all, we'll go back to this initial folder note. And if I go into editing mode, we will go over the code that is used in Dataview to build these folder notes. And just a quick pointer actually, with Dataview, in case you don't know what it is, there are a lot of good tutorials on the plugin on YouTube and on the internet, and tutorials that are going to do a more in-depth and effective job of teaching you all the different ins and outs of Dataview, which is one of the most popular plugins in Obsidian, by the way. So if you haven't heard of it already and are checking out this video, there's no shortage of resources on the internet. So if you want to learn about it, then the option is there, the opportunity is there. But for this video, I just want to stick entirely with the actual use of Dataview that I have in my own vault, because I think although I want to go on to kind of more general principles on this YouTube channel in the future, at the moment I think the most sensible thing to do is just stick to explaining my own Obsidian system and how different plugins and theories work within that. So that being said, I'm going to open up the code to this Dataview table now, and we'll run through it step by step and figure out exactly why it shows the notes that are appearing in the list there. So here we are. And to start a code block in Obsidian, what you have to do is type these 3 backticks, and then with Dataview you have to specify that you're writing Dataview code at the top by writing it next to these backticks here. But anyway, we will run through this Dataview code now. So evidently the first part is to specify that we want a table of notes as opposed to any other different thing. And I think with Dataview, although I'm not 100% sure, the other options are tasks or list, but I prefer the way that tables actually look. So if I were to alter this and change it to list and show you, you can see that it's very similar to the table that existed before. Just a very simple list of all the notes that are inside the folder with the ability to click them and enter the different notes. But I actually prefer how the table looks. And indeed with the table version of viewing Dataview notes up here, you could add other columns into the table if you so wished, which is a way that I like to extend the function in other notes, which I'll show you in a bit, but which I don't do in the most simple version of folder note Dataview tables. But say I wrote something like that, I would then introduce this secondary column that specifies exactly what category, which is a method of properties organization that I use inside this vault, and I'll have a video coming out soon about different ways you can organize your notes, but worry not about this for the time being. But just know that using Dataview tables, you have the opportunity to introduce these extra columns to show extra data about the notes that are inside your folder. But let us go back to the basic Dataview table here. The next line simply specifies, and this is a little bit of extra detail that you might want to include if you replicate this, you might not want to include, but I will explain it shortly now anyway. This line specifies that we want to display notes that are from the tag category / maps of content, or mocks for short. But the defining detail is this negative sign in front of the hashtag, which in fact specifies the opposite, that we don't want this table to display any notes that are of the tag category / mocks, of which this folder note is actually one. You can see up here that the folder note has the tag category mocks. Just to specify, if I were to go over here and head through all the different properties that exist in my vault, I could very quickly sort by all the different mocks in my vault and have them displayed in a search pane down in the sidebar. I might actually do it now just to show you. So you can see there that all the notes that have mocks, maps of content, are very quickly displayed down the sidebar there. But that's going slightly off topic, and I will, as I promised earlier, make a video about all the different ways you can organize your notes in Obsidian. But for now, we're going to go back to this map of content here. And all this line does is make sure that this table does not display any notes that are from the category mocks. So I can demonstrate by showing you here that at the moment there's no notes in here called Write Literature Review. But if I was to remove that line from category mocks, you'd see that Write a Literature Review, which is the name of this folder and the folder note that I'm on, appears in the Dataview table. And now it's a detail, it's the most detailed part of the Dataview code for this table, and the only reason I add it is because I simply don't like having a link to a note that I've already opened. Like, I'm clicking as hard on this as I can, but there's simply no point having that in the Dataview table when you're already on the note, when you're already in the location that that link would take you to. So that is the reason that I have that additional line of code in there. There's no other reason. So if you didn't want to include it and you just wanted to use the table and this next line of code, which I'll go over now, in your tables, then that would be absolutely fine. So we'll go on to this next line, where contains brackets file.folder, comma, this.file.folder. Now, when I first started creating indexes like this, I just swiped this line of Dataview code from a page on the internet that I was reading. And I can't exactly explain why the code acts as it does, because I'm not someone who's particularly good at coding, but I can explain the result of including this line of code in your tables, which is good enough for the majority of us. It's been good enough for me for the entire time that I've been creating these tables to use in my Vault. But all this does simply is specify that your Dataview table only shows notes from the folder in which the Dataview table is contained. So all this does is specify that this Dataview table only shows notes that are in the Write Literature Review folder. And that's about it. That's as simple as it can be to get a complete list of notes that exist in a certain folder in your Vault using Dataview. So if you want to screenshot or write down or try it out yourself, this would be a good time to do so, because I'm going to go on to some slightly more complicated examples of doing this in my Vault now, because this is pretty much the only way in which I use Dataview in my Vault. So I thought I'd head down to being more in-depth and going over some of the more complicated Dataview tables that I show in my Vault. And they're not that much more complicated. They just look it because there's more notes involved. You should have seen that when I launched Parazettal, the project note for that project was absolutely chock full of hundreds of different notes for parts of that project, because Parazettal is one of the biggest things that I actually work on. And with that being said, if you do want to learn more about what I'm calling Parazettal here, then you should check out the top link in the description of this video. And what Parazettal actually is, in short, is this system you've just watched me use for the last 15 minutes in Obsidian. And it's a system that I developed over the last 3 years at the time of recording, of university work, of business work, of personal life. And it's a fusion of Tiago Forte's Para method, which is one of the most popular methods today to just gain control over your digital assets and knowledge and digital life, and Nicholas Luhmann's Zettelkasten, which is very widely appreciated to be one of the best ways to connect your knowledge and come up with new ideas. I came up with, in Obsidian, a way to fuse the two together and have one individual Vault that covers all of your kind of productivity and task completion and project completion needs, as well as your creativity and idea generating needs. So if that sounds interesting to you, then like I said, go down and hit the top link in the description, and you'll get a free introduction course as into the origin of this system and how I went about developing it, and a few more of the details and the intricacies that make it such an effective way to work. So check that out. But anyway, now we're going to head into some of the more complicated folder notes in my Vault, like I said, and quickly run through the Dataview tables that I show in there and how they're slightly different. And perhaps a good place to start would be the content note, because in the resources/content folder, which you can see just here, that's where I store all of the outlines and plans for all the different pieces of content that I plan to make and share on the internet. And here we are inside of the folder note of said folder, and you can see that instead of having just one table that has all of the notes from the folder displayed, we have a series of different tables, and all this is doing is serving to separate all the different pieces of content in this folder by actual platform or purpose of that content. So I create a few different things on the internet. So we've got Parazetal articles, which is personal knowledge management stuff that I share on Medium, where I'm largely talking about note-taking, Obsidian, that kind of thing. Now that's those articles, and those three are the ones that I plan to share soon. I also send emails to my mailing list to do with Parazetal and the same topics as above, and the most populated table at the moment is the one that has Parazetal videos as its title, and this is because I'm pushing quite hard on YouTube at the moment, because I feel like I've wasted a little bit too much time for starting up this channel and going on to share all of this same knowledge as I've been sharing in the articles in the written format above, but in the visual format of videos. And this final last table is for my newsletter, which is more of a personal project where I write about things that interest me at the present time of writing, but we'll head in and look at the Dataview tables here, and we'll see how quite similar they are to the more simple project note tables. So here we are, you can see the same again. We've specified that there is a table that I want to be rendered. So here again, we've specified that we want a table of notes as opposed to a list, or seeking tasks, and we want the notes displayed to only be from the tag status unpublished, which specifies that I haven't actually published said piece yet, because if I remove this, we'd be able to see how many articles I've actually gone about writing and sharing over the course of this year, because any notes that I took before this year I've actually archived. But we will, so you can see how many different notes that would bring up, and we need a way to kind of filter through and just show the pieces that haven't been published yet. And if I just take you into one of these quickly, you can see that the tag I've given it already is status unpublished, just to specify that that piece hasn't actually been published yet and can therefore be shown in this table here. So that's that one line. And also it being from category/articles just specifies that because I give each one of these output sources a different category. I give each one of these output sources a different category tag, just so that I can separate them within the folder note. So you can see the articles have the category of being called articles, whereas the emails have a slightly different category of being called just category Parazetal. So again, I will touch on these details in my video about different ways to organize notes. But at this point, just know that having that extra level of organization allows you to be more granular with the different tables and lists of notes that you display in your folder notes. And we'll go back to this again up here, and you'll recognize this line of code again from the more simple folder notes. And all it does is specify that Dataview should only be looking for notes that meet the above criteria within the folder of 3 resources / content, which is all the content notes that I've written, just so it's not looking across any other point in the vault to try and find any additional notes to bring into this list. And this last line is just an additional level of detail. It's not entirely necessary when you haven't got many notes in the list, but all it does is sort the notes in order of when they were last modified. So file.mtime, you can basically expand that m to be modified, so it's file.modified time, because there's another different value that you can add in here, which is ctime, which is created time. But what's more important to me is the note that I was last working on. So I use file.mtime, and desc just means descending. So the notes that are shown are in descending order of when they were last modified. So that is a slightly more complicated version of a Dataview table in a folder note, and you can see that it's very similar all the way down, just specifying the different category in each table, so that all in all I can have this organized folder note as a point of entry into all of the different pieces of content that I want to create in the future. And I'll show you one more similar example, which is in my Readwise note. And now, for those of you who don't know, Readwise is a kind of highlight aggregation service on the internet in which you can kind of capture tweets or lines from books you've read in your Kindle or articles that you've been reading on the internet if you highlight them. And so it's a very good way to kind of glean all of the short clips and snippets of insight that you've got from all the different pieces of content you've consumed over time. And this works in a very similar way to the content note, in that when notes are imported into Obsidian from Readwise using the Readwise plugin, which I might touch on in another video at some point, but just know that when notes are imported using this plugin, we have this metadata that's already added, and you can see that automatically we've had a tags category books tag added to this note, which means that we can use very much the same kind of Dataview table as before from the content folder note and create a Dataview table that just displays books in the Readwise folder. Now that's very useful, and there's one last separate part here that I actually demonstrated very quickly on the simplest version of the folder note, and that's that if there's other metadata in your note that you've created, then you can display it as a separate column in your table. And if we look here for the books, we've actually got a list that displays the author of said book, and this just gives me a little bit of extra insight into the notes in this list. That is 2 slightly more complex examples of using Dataview to create lists of relevant notes inside the folder notes that I demoed in the previous video. And there's one more thing that I'll just quickly touch upon, in that you can actually create some kind of template for this if you want to insert the same bit of code that you always use in these folder notes, and that's exactly what I do with these project notes up here. So you can see the more simple snippet of code here and the more simple metadata up here. What you can do is, in fact, just create a template of, I'll see if I can find it, of all of this pre-filled data. So there we go, there it is. So you can see that it's just a simple template of all of the mock code that, when added into a specific folder, will exclude the folder note through this line of excluding anything that's tagged with the category mocks, and we'll also display a list or a table of all of the folder notes, or all of the notes, sorry, in said folder. So if creating new folders with folder notes is something that you do often, I recommend creating a template like this, and I'll just quickly show you how it can be used. If I create a new project and create a folder note in there, and if you want to know how I created that new folder note, go back and check my video about the folder notes plugin. I do cover it in there. And now there are two ways I'll quickly cover to add this map of content, code snippet or template in, and one of them is to use Templater, which is a plugin that just simply lists out all of the different templates that you've got inside of your template folder in your Vault. And one of those for me is actually the map of content template, and you can see if I click that, then that same template that I just showed you is inserted straight into said project note. There's one more way that you can do it, and that's to go into the folder notes setting, and you can specify a template that you want every single folder note to have. And you can see that if you use that map of content template inside of that section there, then you get the same code snippet that I just put inside the note every single time. And now, seeing as I actually every now and again create more complex Dataview tables in my folder notes, I don't actually have that template specifically within the folder note settings, but I use Templater, which is another Obsidian plugin that I might touch on at some point in the future. But that's about it for using Dataview to display tables of notes within a certain folder in your Vault. And now, if you use this video in combination with the folder notes video that I last published, I hope that this can take you well on your way to using Dataview and folder notes usefully together. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.